Have you ever truly considered the precise moment a foundational belief cracks, not with a sound like thunder, but with a silent internal fracturing like glass dissolving in water? Have you ever known what it is to realize, in one devastating instant, that the honor you carried like a sacred flame was nothing more than the torch that lit the funeral pyre of the innocent? I am old now and the bones ache with the damp of 1,000 French winters, but the memory is still 23, shivering in a repurposed stone orphanage in Chartres. Before that place, before the cold, relentless logic of Allied captivity, my life was defined by a different kind of logic. I was Greta Müller, a woman whose hands knew the intimate language of brass and steel. For 5 years, I worked in the factory near Essen, assembling the delicate, deadly hearts of artillery shells. Fuzes, a small piece of mechanics that determined when and where the great iron egg would hatch its destruction. My work was precision. It was order. It was a clean, vital necessity. We believed we were the shield. The fatherland's defense depended on the perfect, rhythmic assembly line, on the sweat and dedication of women like me, focused on the minutiae of millimeter tolerances. I saw my purpose in those smooth, cool surfaces, in the meticulous count, in the constant, driving pressure to produce more faster, better. My hands were instruments of national survival. They were strong, calloused, and utterly righteous in their function. I believed in the distinction between the clean, necessary work of the soldier and the dirty, lying intent of the enemy. I saw the Allied bombers turn my city to dust, and I doubled my efforts, fueling my exhaustion with a fierce, cold hatred for the barbarity I was told they represented. The war taught me that the cleanest lines are the first to get blurred by blood. But it was not the front line that taught me. It was the quiet, unnerving efficiency of the Allied processing center. The silence was the first shock. We had been promised the screams, the relentless interrogation, the casual cruelty of men without souls. Instead, there was only the low, constant thrum of supply trucks outside, the occasional clatter of mess tins, and the incessant, maddening drip of rain against the grimy, ancient stone. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and disinfectant, a kind of antiseptic odor that seemed utterly wrong. It was the scent of a wound being clined, not inflicted, and it confused me. Even now, decades later, when the air turns cool and the scent of rain on old, damp wool catches me unexpectedly, I am no longer in my kitchen. I am standing on the cold stone floor of that orphanage, stripped of the tattered uniform that was my shield of identity, shivering in a thin, rough blanket. The past does not feel like a memory I review, but a room I can step back into, the cold seeping instantly into my marrow, the defiant tension returning to my shoulders. The air is thick, and I can taste the metallic tang of the lingering fear in my mouth, but underneath it there is something else, the faint, impossible scent of simple human care. And that, more than any torture, was the trigger that pulled the pin on my carefully constructed world. I stood there waiting for the harsh scrutiny I knew was coming, ready to meet their hate with my own granite defiance. My hands, the instruments of my purpose, were raw, blistered, and cracked from the industrial soap and the relentless friction of the brass casings. They were unsightly, the proof of my loyalty. I held them defensively, ready to be mocked, ready for the soldier to sneer at the factory worker who tried to fight them with tiny gears. Then Matron Eleanor Vance approached. She was a British Army nurse, not a combat soldier, but in my mind, she was one of them. Her face was tired, etched with a kind of profound weariness that looked deeper than simple exhaustion. It was the fatigue of witnessing too much. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask a single question about the fuses, about the war, or about my beliefs. She simply looked at my hands. Her gaze was not judgmental. It was clinical but terribly, impossibly kind. She took them. My hands, the hands that had manufactured death, were taken into hers, which were warm and competent. The shock was instantaneous, a physical jolt. I had braced for a punch and received a touch. Her touch was methodical. From a small tin, she applied a thick, soothing antiseptic ointment to the cracked skin, working it into the raw, split flesh of my knuckles and palms. She rubbed gently, slowly, deliberately, attending to my wounds as if they were the most natural, necessary things in the world, not the insignia of an enemy. The silence of that moment was deafening. It was a complete contradiction of the devil image I had carried in my mind for years. The matron was supposed to be a barbarian, a cruel tormentor, yet here she was, tending to the wounds of the woman who had helped build the bombs dropped on her countrymen. That ointment, that simple, unexpected oil, seemed to seep not just into my skin, but into the rigid iron casing around my heart, creating the first, terrifying crack. I stood frozen, my defiance shattered by a single act of human recognition. The days blurred into a bewildering landscape of decent food, clean if scratchy blankets, and the unnerving absence of malice. We were German prisoners, yet we were treated like human beings who were ill or exhausted, not like captured animals. I watched other prisoners, soldiers and factory workers alike, receive medical attention for shrapnel wounds and malnutrition. They were fed simple rations, yes, but they were rations, not scraps. They were spoken to in low, firm, but respectful voices. My internal narrative began to scream in protest. This is a trick. This is the velvet glove before the iron fist. They are trying to weaken our resolve with comfort. But the iron fist never came. Only the quiet, unsettling rhythm of routine. My intelligence, my observant nature, which propaganda had successfully suppressed, began to stir like a hungry beast. I was assigned to a mundane task, helping to sort and catalog confiscated German paperwork and supplies. It was tedious work meant to keep us occupied, and I performed it with my usual meticulousness. It was in this basement, among the cold, musty scent of wartime paper, that the truth found me. I was sorting through manifests from the supply chain of the industrial region, and there it was. A sheet with the distinctive, familiar stamp of the Essen munitions factory. My factory. I saw the inventory codes for the fuses I had assembled, the exact specific models, and the destination coordinates. But the coordinates were not military depots. They were cross-referenced with operational reports, filed haphazardly. My stomach turned cold as I saw the names. Or rather, Malay villages, not fortified positions. Civilian French villages. The true shattering moment came when I pulled out the accompanying file. Raw, undeniable photographs, printed on cheap paper, but sickeningly clear. The wreckage of houses, the bodies of women, elderly men, children. The destruction was indiscriminate, savage, brutal. And the debris, the remnants of the shell casings in the rubble, were identified with the codes that matched the manifests. The codes that led directly back to the fuses I had handled, counted, and perfected. My hands, the hands Matron Vance had so gently anointed. They were not just instruments of defense. They were instruments of this deliberate, targeted atrocity against the very people whose soldiers now clothed and fed me. The propaganda, the screaming voices, the heroic sacrifice. The righteous war collapsed in an instant, leaving me suspended in a void of unspeakable guilt. My mind raced, clawing for a defense. I did not know. I was only following orders. I only made the parts. But the guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a moral dilemma, so agonizing that it felt like my spine was dissolving. To acknowledge this truth was to betray every loyalty, every friend lost in the bombing raids, every word of the Führer. It was to admit that my suffering, my sacrifice, was for a cause built on slaughter. To deny it was to maintain my honor, but live forever as a liar, knowing that my own hands were stained. I must have been sitting there for hours, the photograph clutched so tightly my knuckles were white, the scent of damp paper and old stone filling my lungs. I was paralyzed, utterly incapable of moving, breathing only shallow, ragged breaths. Matron Vance found me. She did not need to say a word. She saw the manifest, she saw the photographs, and she saw the vacant, devastated look in my eyes. She did not accuse me. She did not use this horrifying discovery to break me or demand confession. Instead, she knelt beside me and without speaking, she gently slid another piece of paper across the table, a simple translation of a German army directive intercepted months ago, confirming the specific retaliatory nature of those strikes. Undeniable proof. She did not condemn me. She offered me the truth, a silent plea for understanding, a gesture that transcended enemy lines. I looked down at my hands. The ointment had mostly faded, but the faint, chemical scent still clung to my skin. These hands, the same hands she had so tenderly cared for, were the ones that had fed the mechanisms of terror. The cold, unrelenting rain outside began to beat harder against the glass, a devastating storm mirroring the chaos and obliteration within my soul. My world was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of a guilt that was not abstract, but tangible, found in the smooth brass of a fuse. and the innocent faces in a photograph. I had survived the war only to find that I was a criminal in a peace I could not yet grasp. I spent the rest of my life tending to wounds, literal and metaphorical. I became a simple woman, helping where I could, never speaking of the factory, never speaking of the processing center. But I never again saw a clear line between us and them. The line that separates the executioner from the victim is drawn in propaganda, but erased by the simple reality of a blistered hand and a kind touch. That simple, unexpected kindness from Matron Vance, it was the acid that stripped away the enamel of my indoctrination, forcing me to look at the monstrous thing I had served. The scars remain. They are not the deep fissures of shrapnel or the burns of the factory. They are the subtle, permanent lines on my palms, the evidence of hard labor. But the deeper scar is the knowledge that creation and destruction are often two sides of the same meticulous effort. My life before the war was about creating things that worked perfectly. The war taught me that a thing working perfectly can be the most terrible evil imaginable. The greatest lie of wartime is not what the enemy says, but the comforting falsehood you tell yourself to make the sacrifice bearable. I lived in that lie for years, breathing the dust of a collapsing empire. But Matron Vance, she offered me a different kind of survival, one that started with the terrifying honesty of my own complicity. She didn't offer me absolution. She offered me the raw, painful dignity of knowledge. History is not a simple story of good versus evil, black and white. It is a tragedy of human beings caught in the gears of a terrible machine, good people on all sides who forget the fundamental, simple truth. The person opposite you is just as human, just as capable of pain, and just as deserving of clean hands and a moment of rest as you are. The truth hurts more than any wound, but only the truth can begin the slow, agonizing process of healing the soul. Look at your own hands now. What stories do they tell? Are they tools of construction or destruction? And are you brave enough in the quiet, reflective moments to examine the truth of what they have wrought? This is the burden of memory. It does not allow you to forget the rain, or the stone, or the gentle application of ointment, or the horrifying clarity of a photograph that demands you acknowledge your own terrible part. Do not let the comforting lie of necessity ever overshadow the quiet truth of humanity. That is my only wisdom, forged in the ruins of my youth.